Welcome to What Do You Know Wednesday?
Where we put each other on the spot so you don't have to.
One topic and one host who knows things.
And one host who hopefully knows some things.
Jess, what do you know about the Salt Lake Temple photo scandal from 1911?
What? I didn't know there was a photo scandal. So nothing. I know nothing.
Okay, clean slate. All
Clean
right, well,
slate.
I'm going to tell you about the time that this 21-year-old Mormon convert secretly photographed the inside of the Salt Lake City Temple and then tried to sell pictures back to the church.
Wait, he tried to bribe them?
Yes, so
Sweet. All
some
right, let's hear
blackmail.
it.
Okay, so let me tell you about these photos and how they came to cross the desk of Joseph F. Smith. They had been taken by Gisbert Bossart, a 21-year-old German-born Mormon convert who had been baptized in Salt Lake City again when he was 16. He married when he was 18, and this was in 1909, by which point, according to his father, he was already, Gisbert, fantasizing about photographing the inside of the temple, which seems a highly specific thing to fixate on.
Does.
Does it not?
Yes.
I know.
That's curious. I'm curious about that.
Maybe it was because he had never been in, and maybe he was just the kind of person who was like, you tell me I can't go in there, and I don't know what's in there, and maybe he was just hyper-focused on it for that reason.
And you tell me I can't do something, and yes, you better believe I'm going to. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it was less the interior of the Salt Lake Temple that fascinated him and just the fact that it was off limits. I don't know, because he was apparently open enough about it that his dad was aware.
His dad knew. Okay.
Okay, so by June 1911, he was 20. His second child had just been born, and he was telling his father that he knew what the inside of the Salt Lake Temple looked like and what happened there. And so his father's like, how do you know? And he said, seen it in a vision. That coy and cheeky young man. And as you know now, and then in 1911, for faithful Mormons, this was high desecration, right? For somebody to go inside the Salt Lake Temple when they don't have a recommend, when they're not allowed, there's a reason that it's only for the sanctified. The Salt Lake Temple in 1911 had only been dedicated 18 years earlier. So maybe that, again, makes sense of why Gisbert had this fixation on it. It wasn't an old tourist landmark. It was the sacred center of Utah Mormonism, like his city he lived in. Okay, so this sacred space, these forbidden images and this attempt to blackmail church leadership from the very top is definitely like a story that more people should know, I think.
I agree.
So Joseph Smith was told, here are 8 photographs of the interior of the Salt Lake Temple, just so you know we're not messing around. And we've got about 60 additional negatives all the way from the basement to the steeples. And if you don't pay for these photos, we're pretty sure we have been talking to people in New York City who will. And Joseph F. Smith refused to negotiate, and then the newspapers started printing interior photos of the Salt Lake Temple on the front page. So the first public shock came on September 16, 1911, when the Salt Lake Tribune and Deseret Evening News both published photographs from inside the temple. And the next day, the Tribune named Gisbert Bossard as the photographer. So we've already established he had immigrated to the US and converted to Mormonism when he came to the States. Okay, so his mother came with him, and I don't know what happened to his biological father, but his stepfather was Theodore Bossart, who adopted him, hence he got his last name. And Theodore later told the Tribune that Gisbert came to Utah as a Mormon in good standing, but then he fell away. He got disenfranchised with the church.
Go figure.
Yeah, really, exactly. There was a very specific reason. Oh, yeah, it was that they were crooked. Yeah, he thought that for the fraudsters that they were. Okay, so he'd be inside Mormonism. He knew the claims. He knew enough about the temple to understand that the power of photographing it was like going to risk exposing church leadership and, you know, make them embarrassed. Photographs showed rooms that most people never saw. So even if you went into the temple, you still wouldn't have seen like the Holy of Holies. I mean, members can only go into designated spaces. So this, even for members, was like an expose. The person who sent the photographs to Joseph Smith was not the person who took them. That man trying to sell them, his name was Max Florence. And he was a Salt Lake City theater and film like promoter who had left Utah for New York City with a set of unauthorized images to try to sell them. And because I mean, I'm not sure how much traction they actually got with sellers in New York, but clearly the Salt Lake papers were willing to pay for them and sell them.
Yeah, no kidding.
Neither Max Florence or the seller of the photographs or Bossart, the taker of the photographs, had ordinary access to the temple. So they got it through an assistant temple gardener. Gardeners, you gotta
It
go,
is always the gardener. You're
right?
right.
I just, they've got the keys and the access and the muddy boot print underneath the window. So, yeah, so this man's name, and maybe they had this German connection, his name was Gottlieb Wutherich, but it's a German W, so maybe he pronounced it Wutherich. So Wutherich, he slept in a room next to the temple. He had keys, and he had to go inside the temple grounds multiple times a day to take care of the flowers, etc. I mean, like inside the building itself, I think. So Bossard had cameras under his coat, and then the gardener basically like gave him entrance to the temple. So before Max Florence had taken the negatives east, Bossart had already tried to sell them to the church. The Salt Lake City police had questioned him because he had taken pictures of the inside of the Beehive house, Brigham Young's house, ostensibly, he said, to send them to relatives in Germany, and because they were interested. So he was allowed to do that, but they asked him for like the plate back. This is like old timey photography, so there was like some metal, like
So he couldn't make multiple copies?
oh yeah, that must be it. The negative, yeah. And he outright refused. So the police, in talking to him, they went to follow up with him about this plate, this negative, I guess it was. And at the time, he spoke so enthusiastically about, oh, I wonder what it would be like to photograph the inside of the temple, that not only once these photographs of the temple came out did his name rise straight to the top of the list of suspects, but he had already taken photographs of the inside of the temple. It was already a deal. Bossart left Salt Lake City for Denver with his pregnant wife, and then Max Florence took the negatives to New York, as I said, where he mailed the photographs to Joseph F. Smith. The images hit the front pages of the Salt Lake Tribune and the Deseret Evening News, with the headline, Max Florence fails to scare the church. So the church decided that they were going to, obviously beat him to the punch, but, take the wind out of his sails. They published the photographs.
Oh.
The paper also said, look, we're not afraid. Hundreds of non-Mormons already toured the temple before it was dedicated. Remember?
But they didn't tour everything.
Exactly. And then they went to great lengths to attack his reputation. So, yeah, the church attorneys had reportedly advised that Florence had probably not committed any crime, okay, and that Bossart could only be charged with trespassing because Florence must have somehow had access. But James E. Talmadge, who was on a general authority at that time, he went Karen on them, and he wrote to the first presidency. He's like, first of all, we've got to get ahead of this. Publish our own booklet on the temple with authorized photos of the interior. Take the sting out of it. And the first presidency said go ahead. So he prepared this manuscript of the inside of the Salt Lake Temple with official photographs. And Florence and Bossart, at this time, they kept trying to sell the negatives. They obviously have been like, they didn't take our threat seriously. So they said, okay, let's like book the tabernacle as if the church was going to like hire it out to them for 2 nights. And then we'll show these photographs. We'll do a 2-night sellout show at the tabernacle of.
Did the church not know who was renting the tabernacle?
I do not think that exactly. This is what he proposed, right? So, and then they said, yeah, and then Gisbert was going to give a lecture. Part of the proceeds were going to go to the poor. This was what they proposed to Joseph F. Smith, who apparently did not respond to the proposal. Okay. Yeah. So here the church is like trying to undercut them and publishing the official photographs in places such as Popular Mechanics and Leslie's Weekly. Okay, so Florence and Bossart, they finally put together a New York lecture show where they used slides, and then they advertised it obviously as like genuine interior images, these genuine views of the Mormon temple. And the Deseret News reported, whether this is true or not, the church-owned Deseret News reported that only 8 people attended, including its own correspondents. Do we believe this failed? I don't know, but it definitely didn't like continue. By early 1912, Bossart apologized to Joseph F. Smith. He said that Florence would return the temple photos without requiring any money. And then he praised church leadership and said he'd found the truth again. The first presidency refused to let him to come back into the church. They described him or his behavior as an act of treachery, greed, and desecration of the house of the Lord. I guess he thought he could just say sorry and make it go away, like, you know.
Well, and I wonder, though, what was his motivation at that point to try to get back in the good graces of the church? Like, what did he think the gain would be at that point?
Well, that's a good question, and I'll have to look more deeply into that. There's been a couple of dialogue articles published on this topic. So if Bossart, so the collection of photographs is actually now at Utah State University, and the description on the collection says that he took the images as revenge. So maybe his feelings about the church, like whatever resentment he'd built up, which I do remember it was about something specific, maybe that went away. Maybe because the church had published their own better official temple interior photos, he didn't have anything to gain, and he just, it just made his life easier. I don't know. That was this sort of James E. Talmage's PR crisis response, right? Like, we'll get there first with an official church publication, which is interesting because the church has sort of been taking the same response ever since. They took control of the reveal. They're like, it's not what you say, it's who has control of the narrative.
And that is exactly, you nailed it. That is their approach. Like, we're going to get in front of this because we're going to define the story and then control it moving forward, whether or not, especially not that it's ever the true story. But
right, it's like the temple is mysterious and holy and untouchable until it's breached. And then it's like, God, thousands of public traipsed through it before it was dedicated, and
you've all seen it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, nothing to write home about. Look, here it is. We're so transparent.
We're not doing anything weird inside, like pretending to slit our own throats or disembowel ourselves.
We're not doing those things. And Max Florence was like, they couldn't control him at all because he wasn't Mormon and he didn't give a fuck. And he had somehow managed to acquire the architectural drawings, or the original architectural drawings of the salt.
Wow.
And so they think what happened is the original builders, like the draftsmen, might have accidentally, like, either there were like archives, construction archives from the city, or the draftsman accidentally sold them or something, but that he wound up with the original blueprints. So regardless of how he got his hands on them, that's what the church knew, that he had them, and that unsettled them, like, from the beginning. Yeah, knowing the layout of the temple, that was his motivation. I mean, multiple people wanted, they were coming at it from different angles, and it just converged. Max Florence wanted in, Bossart wanted in, like, people wanted to see what the temple was like, and temple
But
security isn't what it
yeah,
was.
Joseph F. Smith was having none of it, huh?
And the reason he would not negotiate with those terrorists. But
Oh,
yeah, you're
wow.
right about brand sort of integrity in an era where people were just beginning to say, yeah, what is going on in those weird temples with the Masonic stuff? So it's interesting that was like the beginning of a playbook about,
Yeah. The church's playbook about how they quickly work to control the narrative and see how they can then affect public sentiment, sounds like.
well, there's some very interesting images attached to this story, which we will post on Instagram. So
Yeah, I'm
that
looking forward to seeing them.
well, there's much, much, much more that I could share about this scandal, but I mean, someone should have written a whole book. I don't think they have, probably. Hold on,
Well, maybe that's on your list of things to do, Hannah.
it might just be.
Yep.
Why not? Get really
You
niche.
got nothing else to do.
Get really niche, obviously. But yeah, the big overarching picture is story, church controls the narrative.
Yep.
All right,
Well,
so we'll be back on Sunday with a full episode.
we will, and we will be back next Wednesday for another What Do You Know Wednesday. Until then, we really appreciate everyone listening, and if you could go ahead and hit like and subscribe, that is worth everything to us.
Yep, we're also on social media. Jess, before I go, I just want to say I'm sorry for what I said when I was Mormon.
And I'm sorry for what I said when I was Mormon too.
Thank you.